I'm joined today by author Dr. Anna Whateley, who is neurodiverse and all things awesome, as you're going to find out as we go. Hi, Anna.
Hi, how are you?
Good. Now, you've got a book that was released a couple of weeks ago, and it's a young adult fiction about a neurodiverse character. And today we're going to have a little bit of a chat about the book, about being neurodiverse, and other random things. So the book's called Peta Lyre's Rating Normal. And I'm instantly drawn to the rating normal part. And I guess someone who isn't neurodiverse probably wouldn't think about rating and normality. Can you describe that a little bit?
It's a funny thing because it kind of fell into the book almost by accident, and yet it was the whole point at the same time. So masking behaviours, as you would know, about where we're and often overtly taught how to perform ourselves in a more typical way. And I say typical just because I actually hate the word normal, and yet we all know that it's a code for normal. So and that is a process of learning to not be yourself to make other people more comfortable. And so one of the reasons for the book was to explore what would happen if you managed that, which I'm sure a lot of us don't quite, or some of us do really well, and it's really destructive. And I just wanted to see what would happen if you did get that right, and what would the costs be, and is that what people really want? And I'm not quite sure. Normality is both horrible and yet still desirable, even when we're working really hard on ourselves. To not do that, it's the repercussions for not appearing normal are often quite severe.
Yeah, society really expects it, doesn't it? And even if we don't overly think about it before we leave the house or have a meeting, lately, all the Zoom meetings, it's all the things that we have to do to kind of feel like we're fitting in and feel like we're
Yeah.
not going to be judged by others.
Yeah, we're trying not to make anyone else uncomfortable, because even though people say we have no empathy, which is just the biggest laugh, we're really worried about making people uncomfortable and having them go, oh, and we don't want them to do that. I think it's really hard not to do.
I'm not sure about you, but with empathy, I have too much and
Yes.
also don't know how to express it. And that long, complicated A word came up in discussions I was having the other day, and I can't say it for the life of me. The one where you can't describe emotions.
Alexithymia.
Yeah, that one.
Yes, I had that one thrown at me a couple of years ago as not knowing not knowing how you feel, basically, just not even knowing. So people will often say, especially when I launch a book, and they're like, oh, you must be so excited, your book's out in the world. And I nod and I say, yeah, thinking, I don't know, excited? No, I'm just concentrating on what I have to do today. And then 3 days later, I'll be like, oh my goodness, I launched a book and all this stuff happened, and that was so nice. But at the time, didn't have a clue, couldn't process it fast enough, let alone label what was going on inside to express it to somebody.
Delayed processing gets me in so much trouble.
But I didn't know I did that. I didn't know I had delayed processing. I thought I was very quick, because I can be quick on some things. So it's like half of the things I'm extremely quick, and then half the things I'm so incredibly slow, but I didn't know that I was. And that got me into a lot of trouble,
And I
basically.
know for me, like triggering things, I can appear fine and I can say I'm fine, but then kind of 2 days later, sometimes even hours later, when I'm back in my own kind of comfort space, everything just kind of falls apart. And
I had
I
I
don't
had this.
masking, I think it's kind of a bit more than that.
It's
Like, I don't know, I don't do well with illogical. things.
Yeah. Yes. And I find, especially that triggering, and what happens there, that, and I was in a conversation recently where someone was saying things to me, you know, about autistic people and saying, oh, no one really wants to read about autism, and said this to my face. And I'm so busy trying to do the right thing. I went, oh, yeah, we should do blah, blah, blah. And actually basically nodded and agreed my way through a conversation that was so offensive, wrong. But I think it was a very intense situation. And it was not an equal power situation. So I didn't, you know, and to be honest, it probably wouldn't have been the right space for me to speak back to those comments. But it took me a couple of hours to then go, oh, wow, that was really horrible. That was really, really horrible. The things that person said were downright offensive. But it took me that long to really process that, let alone imagine if I'd tried to come up with some kind of comeback. I have to be in a really good space to manage that. And it wasn't going to happen that day.
In some ways, that kind of flight response can be really helpful, even though we don't realize we're doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So back to the book. Now, from the first page, like all these alphabet letters come up, which is kind of hilarious because we know the medical world and labels and acronyms and trying to understand what it all means. As I read through the book, I found the different conditions very accurately described, like kind of almost too accurately, kind of. You just like the head just went straight into that. Oh yeah, it's me. Did you have to do a lot of research to better understand the characteristics and behaviors of people who are autistic, have ADHD and sensory processing disorder or other neurodiverse conditions? Or did it come from your own kind of personal experiences?
It just came from my own experiences. And I wrote them thinking that I was only and at the time I was diagnosed with ADHD. And I knew I had the sensory issues and things. And so when I first wrote it, that's who I wrote, was an ADHD character, and wrote this experience knowing autism was playing into it there, because I knew there was something there. And I have children who are diagnosed autistic. So I was thinking in terms of a blend of their experiences and my own of life. And then, but by the time I read back on what I'd written, I thought, that's not just ADHD. And I could see it more clearly in that way. And it was then that I went for an assessment, because I needed someone else to make that decision, basically, because I couldn't see myself clearly enough. And without wanting to sound cocky, I'm smart. So when I go to a therapist, I can convince them I've got all sorts of things if I want to, because I'll say certain things. So instead, I went in and I took in things like report cards, things that other people had said, so that it wasn't based on my own, you know, what I was saying. It was based on a lot of other things, so that I could trust what came out of that assessment, because I really needed to know. And if I was going to claim my own voices, which I wanted to do, and it felt right, I needed to know for sure, because that's a big thing. I think that's a really big thing to do. But in terms of writing those and using the letters, I didn't research. I had to research certain things in terms of logistic things, in terms of going through school now. And obviously I have the experience of my children, but they don't go to a TAFE just a few logistical things like that. And the use of the letters, I love and hate them. We all do. They get the main reason, I guess, I'm pro diagnosis, and no matter how much I hate the letters, they're the way that I access help. And so without them, so basically you must play into the system to have any benefit from it. And we're either going to suffer from it and have no benefit, or suffer from it and have some benefit. So therefore I choose to take the letters and then try and own them in some way, and then we can speak back to those and define them, and form a community around them. So it's a little bit of a finger to the letters, as well as loving them.
Yeah, no, I get it. Particularly with things just accessing any supports, and I think also
Yeah.
it's that affirmativeness and not that whole just wondering why and tending to
Oh,
Google and just being like, oh, it could be this, it could be that. It's a
yep.
bit of this, and yeah,
Yeah, I needed to know. I really, really needed to know. But it never occurred to me, which is hilarious when you think of how much I already knew about autism. But it just goes to show how much we can absorb our own narratives that we've created. We absorb our own mask to the point where we don't know that's what it is. We think that's what everybody does. And I've been quite shocked that people are reading it. And when I first wrote it and people read it, that they didn't think that way. There's a little bit of me that was like, are you sure? Are you sure? Are you just denying that to yourself? Surely everybody goes through this, really. So I'm kind of understanding that no.
kind of sucks to be them, doesn't it?
Yeah.
They're missing out. Now, I love how the story moves from Brisbane suburbs and anyone that knows Brisbane's weather. Like, I can't. I love Brisbane as a city, but I cannot stand, particularly summer. I
Yeah.
tried a couple of times, and those 30-degree stormy humidity. I don't do well with humidity. Yeah,
Humidity's
I moved
hard.
to
Yeah.
snowy mountains, which is the complete opposite side of the world in regards to temperature. There's a focus on bunking with kids from different schools and learning to socialize in a more adult environment. Thinking back to your school years, what were school camps and socializing with strangers like for you? And how does that compare to today and the things that you do?
Basically, it was mostly my worst nightmare. I still remember those very first primary school camps, and my main memory was that. So I really liked the tent, and I really liked the water activity we did. I don't even know what that was, except the water was brown because it was stained by the tea tree. Okay, so that was fascinating, obviously, because I remember it. I haven't thought about that for a long time. But they served chicken drumsticks, and there wasn't a hope in hell of me eating meat or meat off a bone. I'd never eaten anything like it, so I was hungry a lot. I didn't like any of the food, and it was a point for teasing and misunderstanding because I wouldn't have just said that. I would have tiptoed and skirted and not known what to do. So basic things like accessing food, coordinating yourself to go for a shower, um, and not quite knowing if you're doing things right all the time or all the way until from the minute you wake up to the minute you go to bed. But then later on, I did do a musical camp in high school, and that was more fun because it was focused around the musical and you were there to do this thing and you had a really clear purpose. And the actual musical part was great. We stayed up too late though, and the people in the cabin were strange, and we got looked in at night because the kangaroos were dangerous. And if anyone, and so someone had died in the area because if they got out of their cabin at night and a kangaroo had, it didn't end well. Not sure what age your audience is, so I'll be a little delicate there. And so we got locked in at night in our cabin, which means you can't access toilets. You've got the wrong sheets. Everything smells wrong. Someone would come in the cabin when no one was allowed to come in the cabin. There was a lot to process, basically, but it had focus. But then I went on a ski trip, and by then food has just progressively gotten better over my whole life, but very, very, very slowly. So yeah, it progressively got better. But the problem for me on the ski trip was our coach did break down, and I was actually on my ski trip with an ex-partner, which was very difficult because we were forced to be in proximity. And I was in a cabin with people from a private school. I don't know, should I say? I don't want to ruin the book for anyone, but they were twins. And the twins, though, weren't like these twins in the book. I did change those sorts of things, but I thought it was fascinating at the time because I'd never met identical twins before. And they had names that were extremely similar, and I couldn't tell them apart at all. And they were both dating two people called the same thing, and it was entirely confusing. And they did things that confused me along the lines of they shared food, as in they would offer you all the time. And I was like, what? I'd come from a big family. You got hold of food, you took it. You didn't be like, do you want one of these? Should I make you a cup of tea? It's like, what? You'd be there for hours and you'd have nothing to eat by the time you'd offered it around. You know, and plus we didn't have the money to go and say, oh, this is my very expensive packet of something. Would you like some? I've since learned that's what you do. It's polite. It's worth having less food. Kind of. Okay, maybe I'm not completely coming to terms with this yet. To offer someone something all the time. I don't know. Thanks to coronavirus, I don't know if we'll have to do that anymore. So little things now, as you can see, sorry, they're little details of a trip. They're things that stuck with me, and things like the dance floor and being embarrassed, and just not understanding those things, and for so many days in a row. So there's no downtime in there unless you're on your own skiing down a slope. You know, that was your alone time. Or and we were subsidized. I was at a TAFE college, so again, it wasn't like that. But it was a huge education in how to behave. But then as I got older, I then threw myself into those situations on purpose, realizing they were a really good excuse to not get things right. So I went and traveled when I was 17. I went to the UK and Scotland and worked and moved around for 6 months on my own. But I was anyone I wanted to be because no one knew me. And so when I got everything wrong, they'd be like, oh, she's so Australian. I'm like, yeah, that's it. It's because I'm Australian that I have no idea what the hell I'm doing. And it just allowed me to be free in that way. And I love that. And I would still do that pretty much every time something went wrong. If I could just run away. You can't do it as you get older and you have more responsibilities. It's hard.
You can't do it in the current environment.
And no one's going anywhere now.
But so all of those experiences, you weren't diagnosed, of course, which is just makes it all times kind of amplified and harder to figure out. Like, and I know you haven't been able to go to face-to-face book launches or any kind of recent author events, but how do you manage events now, and whether that's traveling for a book event or a holiday? Or
I think as I've gotten older, and especially since having children, I've become more and more anxious as a person and controlling and planning. And I put a lot of work into any trip. Like I took all 5 of us to Finland, and the planning for that had me twisted up in such knots. It was so overplanned, it was ridiculous. But at the same time, I kind of love it when it goes wrong, because then all of that goes up in the air and now we're running on, flying on the seat of our pants, and we can just do things. And then my ADHD kicks in and everything's fine. Whereas beforehand, it's very much that over planning person. And for the book events, I actually finally, having realized these things about myself, thought that I needed to do something about it. So I started to, and I was already going to book events at Avid Reader in Brisbane to try and get to know the book community, to see how to behave. It sounds horrible. I went and people watched, and I went and did a lot of very embarrassing things, but I don't really care because I met people. I know the thing is, yes, I'm the first person to go up and say, hi, my name's Anna, I'm feeling so awkward. Can I just stand with you because I don't know anyone? And yes, that's probably wrong, but it is also a really great way to meet people. And mostly people are understanding and love it. And if they don't, they're probably not the people I needed to know anyway. But I also took a practice trip to Melbourne because I knew that one would throw me. I've only been once on a conference, and I know Melbourne functions to me a lot like London or a big city, and that I know people are very different there. I know that sounds weird, but the climate is different, the streets are different, the expectations are different. I'm really a big dag. I'm not fashionable. I won't know what I'm supposed to do in really basic situations. So I decided to go to the Emerging Writers Festival, and my health wasn't good in terms of physical disability, so I got somewhere very close to the State Library, so I didn't have to do public transport to get to the events because I knew I wouldn't manage that. I can't time manage. So I arrived very early for the event and then ended up in Melbourne at like 9 o'clock, and things weren't open. It was a weekend. Why are things in Brisbane? Everything's open because it's hot. You know, it's nice in the morning. Everywhere's already churning by 9. But it was raining and the streets were wet, and I was trying to find somewhere. Oh, it was hilarious. It was a bit of a disaster, but I met some lovely people. And I thought to myself, by the time I got home after a giant panic attack and about 6 hours of crying through the centre of Melbourne, because I went to a session on trauma, which was really sensible, not sensible, not at all. So I learned another thing about myself. I managed to get myself back on the aeroplane and home. And that was such an achievement. And then I thought, right, now I know what will go wrong potentially and what I can do better next time when I'm on stage. So if I go, no one was looking at me. So it was a really good learning opportunity, because I knew that next time I went down, there was potentially going to be more attention on me, and when I needed to get that right. So practice was a good idea, even though it was very, very hard.
Melbourne is a very complicated city to navigate. I mean, I grew up in Perth, and Perth's a lot like Brisbane in many ways.
Yes.
But things with Melbourne, which is where our office is in Carlton, in the morning I can get a train like through the city loop, and it's called a city loop, but in the afternoons it doesn't actually loop. It bypasses like the 2 main stations, Southern Cross and Flinders Street.
So it's a non-looping loop.
It's a loop when they want it to be a loop.
Yeah,
And
see,
the
you have to.
afternoon, it's all about getting people out of the city, so train through the loop in the middle of the city don't go to the main stations.
Okay.
And that
if you know the
gets me every
system.
time. Oh no, it doesn't help, because you forget. You just get caught up with everything and you expect it to be, it was the same till 1 o'clock, so it should be the same after 1 o'clock.
Yeah. And knowing a public transport system, it's great when you know it and everything stays the same. Like even a system that's weird like that, if you know that once you've adjusted, then that's okay. It takes a long time. And the thing that gets me, I remember going, and I was in Scotland and I was in Edinburgh. So I was like 17 in Edinburgh. I decided I was going to live there and become a law clerk. I don't know, 2 weeks I think I lasted. I got an apartment. I went and bought pillows. That's how invested I was in living in Scotland. I'd been in Dundee for a few months by then. And I went on the bus and I knew where I needed to go for an interview, and I knew the station I had to get off at or the stop. But how would I know when I reached that stop? But you're not allowed to talk to the drivers there. There's a big sign and a big glass wall saying, do not speak to the driver. Someone helped me with the money because I had the wrong change. You weren't allowed to use certain bits of money. And I'm like, but how will I know when to get off the bus? And again, my ability to talk to strangers inappropriately was great, because in the end, I just appealed to somebody, because if you don't know, and I want to be prepared to get off, I don't want it to surprise me. I don't want to be going along on the train and then the stop comes along and I'm still sitting down. How will I know I'm going to get up and out that door in time? Even if it's an empty train, I still need to know stops in advance. Now I need to get up. Now I need to move this way, and then I'll be ready when it opens. Oh, it's just making me flustered thinking about it all.
I have friends that insist on staying seated until it stops, and I'm like, no, don't put me in position. But I mean, nowadays Google Maps is my friend in those kinds of situations. I just have it open and I look and wait for that to be as close to the dot marker point as I can get.
Yes, we do have that now.
So kids totally don't know what they missed out on, do they?
No.
Now, there's a lot of sensitive, and speaking of sensitive, like I really did not plan at all for lighting in this room, because I mean my eyesight's bad enough as it is, but I am like looking at this list of questions and my brain's like it becomes blurred together. But that's okay, we will get there. There's a lot of sensitive and some triggering topics covered throughout the book, from mental health, childhood trauma, teen sexuality, which can be hard as well, and also navigating being neurodivergent and trying to fit into the world. A lot of autistic people have personal experiences with some of all of these. From your own experiences and also from Peter's world, what would you say to someone who's struggling with understanding who they are and whether that's neuro differences or sexuality or gender differences and navigating a world that still isn't neurodiverse friendly?
I would say try to find your community, try to find your people, because that's you need somewhere you belong, and a sense of belonging is one of the main research has shown the sense of belonging is crucial to good mental health, and that's something we often lack, is somewhere that we feel we belong and that won't be taken away from us at any time. And for me, that's the one of the biggest parts of the novel, is that Peter needs that sense of belonging, and that's what she really, really wants. And I think yes, professional diagnosis for things is wonderful. There are a lot of barriers, though. So there are a lot of barriers to, in terms of money and access, and especially now, how on earth do we do anything at the moment? I have people messaging me saying they've been half diagnosed and now they can't get back, and so they can't get support in other countries. So I'd say the way around that, if you're quite sure of perhaps where you think you fit in terms of neuro divergence or sexuality, is to find find a place where you are more likely to meet like-minded people. For example, I'm thinking Lego Club, and that's just because we started one we didn't list it as for autistic children or children with ADHD. We just said it was a welcoming space, and we just kind of knew the people who would be coming, and most of them were not neurotypical. And so for 2 years we ran a Lego club, and that was just a way for all of us to connect around a special interest. And it might be something like laser tag, or it might be a chess club. I mean, there's a lot of things. So if you have a special interest and you find a community that have the same, they may not be technically the same, but you are likely to find some people who you feel that sense of belonging with, who you feel more comfortable with, and you'd be amazed how much that can lift your whole life. And it may be an online community, and it might be that you find a Minecraft server. I'm a big Minecraft fan, and if you're young, be very careful with that in terms of safety. But if you're older, just find that right Minecraft server for you, or it may be Second Life or any other online community is just as valid. And if you feel your sense of belonging in a digital world, there's no difference. You still have those emotions and those feelings, and that's a great thing. And when it comes to being not heterosexual, I think I am probably the last person to ask, because I didn't find any acceptance or belonging. I did in my own school, in the TAFE, but when I went to university and when I went on from there was nothing. It was openly rejected, overtly rejected. So, and that was terrible. And now I know how terrible that was for me. And nowadays everything's, I am hoping, different in that. I'm hoping there's a little bit more awareness now, and thanks to the internet, it's a little easier to find people. But again, to be very careful that they're the right people and that they're safe. You got to be really. And if you're not sure that you can judge that, it's okay to ask someone to help you to judge if that's safe. Because I sometimes think, hang on a minute, you're asking me to do what? How the hell would I know if that's a safe place to be? So sometimes I will ask a close friend or a partner and say, do you think this one looks all right? And they can help me make that decision. Yeah.
Asking for help is definitely a good idea. I think we kind of forget or get afraid, but I guess across all kinds of things, it's okay to ask our friends and partners and people we trust for advice.
And try to work on, I should just mention, try to work on feelings of shame. They're destructive and they do us no good. And they're at the core of a lot of problems. And I'm not saying you can just don't feel them, because, that's like saying, don't think of a rose, we're all thinking of a rose now. We have shame in many ways for all sorts of things, but knowing that that's what it is can help. Knowing that that's the motivating factor for things going wrong, or for me, for self-isolation, a lot of that comes from shame. And to face that and to try and figure out where that came from and work on it, whether or not you have professional help with that, because I know not everybody does. But just even understanding that that is such a huge problem, then hopefully there's a way forward once you understand to work on it.
Yeah. Touching on the gender and sexuality side, now, I don't know if you know, there's some research out that autistic people are, I think, 7 times more likely to be gender diverse or have sexuality diversity. And there hasn't been too much research into why. And I mean, there's some kind of thoughts where we have enough kind of shit to deal with, where we just kind of don't care. It's a layer that it's like, oh, well, like, and so, we get judged and treated differently anyway. Do you have any thoughts, or have you noticed that since kind of engaging more with the autistic community in particular? I'm not quite sure about the ADHD community. I was only diagnosed a few months ago, so.
You were, and welcome. I think neurodivergence is so layered in terms of ADHD and ASD. I don't think anyone's going to be able to pull that apart anytime soon. But yeah, we're definitely more likely not to be heterosexual. I have two sort of bit of cognitive dissonance on this one, where I think it should be unquestioned. And I really feel sometimes that sexuality should be unquestioned. And I wanted that for Peta. She's unquestionably who she is as a queer teenager. And that was never, it's one of the labels I avoided, because it's not a diagnosis. So the labels I included were clearly medical, but her sexuality was natural. And so there's no need, in terms of the way she sees herself, she didn't need that. I'm not saying that later on. I just think at her age and the way she was in her life, she wasn't overtly looking for queer communities and that, but later on, hopefully that would come and help her through that search if she needed it. But at first when I wrote her, and she always was the way she was, and then I thought, am I piling too much on her? Have I added too many? Are publishers going to reject the rest of this book because I've put too many things in? So then I thought, well, maybe that's true. Maybe this is just too unlikely. And that's when I looked into the statistics that really just show, and the community I'd found online definitely represented this, that this was an experience that would resonate with enough people for me to feel confident going ahead that she could be who she was. And that was liberating, to leave her as she was. And that's what I really wanted for her. And I think in terms of why, the thing is, I know they've done a lot of research in terms of genetics to do with neurodivergence and found all these codes and connections and genes and all the science that I'm not sure they understand well enough to be promoting. And that's great. And I can see that hereditary nature, the hereditary side there myself, and makes a lot of sense. But sexuality and gender are very different to that. There's a bit of danger, I feel, just as the autistic and community have found. There's a bit of danger if someone identifies a cause and a gene. What happens when they can remove them? And I don't want that. And so I'm kind of caught, although there are people who are autistic and who would like to have not been. And I understand that. And I'm not saying that there's not a benefit for a section of the autistic community. And bearing in mind, we used to have Asperger's, so we were a separate group, and the much higher needs community. There are some who feel differently about this. I personally don't want anyone to go and find a cure for any of it, and so I see the danger there. But I do understand that others don't agree with that, and not sure which garden path I've just led myself down there. I don't know. I know there are weird statistics on sexuality, like second brothers are more likely to be gay. Twins, you're more likely to have one gay twin. There are all these things that overlap, and how are they going to know what caused it? Do you see how the language is just destructive? You don't cause it. Like it just is. It's such a dangerous path to go down.
I guess the hard bit is it's adding an extra layer of judgment and lack of support. And I know particularly for me, and it was only a couple of years ago that I kind of discovered that side of who I am, and like going through like with my regular kind of medical appointments and all those things, the responses and kind of the stereotypes and boxes of like what would make me happy in regards to having a partner of the opposite sex. And it just
it's hard.
adds another level.
Yeah. And it's hard. I actually had a friend whose son was diagnosed as presenting with female autism. They decided that yes, he fit the criteria that they would use for a girl as a kid, right? And so then, like, where's the point where they look at those criteria and say, so you mean you can have boys who look like girls who are autistic, and girls aren't diagnosed because they don't look enough like the boys? And then you've got, can someone just wake up to that? Like, that's just, to me, is something that should be really, as a researcher, I'm thinking, who is looking at this data and not going, oh, you mean we need to change perhaps the diagnostic criteria and stop gendering the children? So in many ways, difficult.
Yes, no, I agree. And I think when I came out as non-binary, one of my friends was like, you've never been a manly man kind of thing. And I was like, yeah, well, and I'm like, yeah, that box, you don't fit into that box. And I was quite happy with that. Now, women and girls, and we know getting a neurodivergent diagnosis as a girl or a woman can be harder for different reasons. What's your experience with navigating?
Yeah, I think it's changing slowly. It's changing. I think it's actually going better in the professional community in terms of diagnosis than it is in society to understand what's gone on. So, and I sought out a psychologist for my assessment who I knew was accepting of different sexualities and of and was experienced in diagnosing women and girls. And so I was very careful not to go to someone who I didn't feel safe with in that way. But also in terms of my children, I've had both ends of this. One thinking that certain characteristics. This is really hard to say. I've got to be careful with my children's privacy, so it's a little bit difficult. But seeing girls as hysterical, which is an extremely difficult, problematic term. And, so what would in a boy be seen as, oh dear, they're having a meltdown. In a girl is, oh goodness, what a drama queen. And to identify that difference, the problem that was going on there. And yet with some, again, difficult. So girls that present with more male typical characteristics, it's easier for a professional to diagnose them. And yet the older that you get and the more you've learnt to mask, the harder it is to diagnose girls because they've already learnt so many things to cover up where they're at. And I think especially part of the trouble being the very old surveys, they still get schools to fill in the Connors scale, for goodness sake, like really old tick box things. And basically they get the teachers and parents who may, and bearing in mind how well do they know that child, in all honesty, to tick all these boxes and come up with a little number. And according to that number, out of 100, you do or don't get go off for diagnosis, to be sent to be diagnosed. And so you can be cut off right at the pass there. You can miss that opportunity right there. And especially if a girl is cute, is pretty. Well, they're adorable. We're not going to mind if anything is done differently because they're so cute. And then you get a lot of comments of, because they're friendly or they have friends, well, they're not very autistic. They might just be a little bit. Or, because they're not presenting, if they don't all look like the stereotype that we have, and especially for ADHD, I think it's even harder to be diagnosed. So autism, we're coming along, I think the professional side is becoming a little bit more aware now. But ADHD I was not actually laughed at, but nearly laughed at. And every time I go for my script or to, if my GP changes and I mention ADHD, there's always a smile because that's kind of funny. And my doctor who I'd had for nearly 10 years even said to me, "But you've got a PhD." I'm like, "Yeah, you ever heard of hyperfocus? Like, come on." Like, I just thought that the misunderstanding there is just so profound. But hopefully, so that's why one of my main things is to not have the ADHD erased, because autism's bigger. Everyone likes this idea of identifying the book, and that everyone wants to talk in terms of autism, whereas then the ADHD gets pushed aside a lot. And I'm not really sure why. I don't know.
Now, I don't know, is there, we've got autistic to tie in with ASD. Is there something for ADHD? I've been looking and I can't find.
And in terms of a term?
Yeah.
No,
Like
you can't be ADHD.
Okay.
Even though we definitely are. There's something going on about being the Dread Pirates, and that stands for something. I can't remember what though. Something. They need to rejig the term, because attention deficit is just hilarious, because what we lack is regulation, and we have a lot of attention just applied to the things you don't want us to apply it to. So as you get older, it gets easier because you can choose your subjects at school. And once you can do that, you're like, "Oh, thank goodness," and that gets more and more and more specific the older you get. But you still can't clean the house, or you still can't, I'm still not going to want to put down my jigsaw puzzle to make your breakfast unless I've had my tablets. And I'm afraid that's just every morning of my life. I have my tablets so I can stop doing whatever activity I have on the table, so I can do the jobs I have to do to look after my children. And that's the other trick, is there are tablets that help with ADHD. They don't cure ADHD, and they don't work 24/7. And so I think there's a lot of misunderstanding around the medication. So I really wanted Peter to be taking my medication and to explain how difficult and yet essential it is. But in terms of terms, I'm still left saying I am autistic and have ADHD. I still can't be ADHD. That's why I like saying I am neurodivergent, because I can just be that and you can all figure it out.
Yeah, ticks all the boxes. But I know, back to the whole cleaning kind of thing, like I went through years and years, even when I had, because I had an ADHD diagnosis when I was a kid, but at the time you couldn't have both ADHD and autism. That was under the DSM-4. And
yes.
And at the time, my pediatrician was just like, "No, there's clearly autism here." So they kept pushing for that. And it took a long time to get there. I was 13, I think, but I was diagnosed with ADHD. I was 7. And, but all through the years, and only until I even now, been living independently for 4 years, but I need help with cleaning. But I get people that don't understand that that I can't do it. I still get "Oh, you're lazy," or "You're not trying," or "I can teach you how to organize your space so that you don't make it messy."
Oh, yeah.
I'm like, you can teach me all you want, but come back tomorrow, because it's not going to be any
I can put the systems in place. I could go and tell someone else how to do that. I can instigate systems. I am so good. I'm like a manager. I know how it should be done. And I have the inherent perfectionism, which is, it's horrible, because then you can see how wrong everything is all the time. That doesn't mean I can actually do it. Like I can see everything. I see how many steps are involved. I can't choose which one to do first. And then the weight of all of them come flying at you. And so you do none because you don't want to make the wrong choice. And it's immobilizing. And add on physical disability. And then even when you do get inspired to do something like clean your bathroom with a toothbrush because you're in that kind of mood, I got a my pulse went up to 170 because I decided to clean the shower for the first time in I don't know how long. So it's like, oh, great. Now the times when I really could possibly do something, my physical body says, no, sorry, now you're going to be punished for that. But yeah, it's not that it's, and it's so hard. It's so hard. And especially when half of those judgments come from yourself. It's not even that other people are always saying this thing to you. It's that you say it to yourself. So you look and you think, I'm so lazy. And lazy is always a value judgment. Lazy, even when I am being lazy, I'm not. I'm just deciding this thing's more important than that thing. And it's a value. It's my values. And my values are that this activity is more important than that one. And I'm really open about that with the kids. And I'll say to them, okay, look, I know I haven't done that, but didn't we have fun doing this? And I just decided this was more important. And they're like, oh, thank goodness. We're really glad that you did that. We don't care that this is a mess because we decided to organize all of our gems in order of size. Sorry, jokes I can only have with certain people.
I think that putting priorities in place, and may not be priorities that like someone else will see as priorities, but I think it kind of ties into managing our capacity to do things, and sometimes just doing something that's more fun rather than something work or something kind of cleaning or like a need activity is better for us because it gives us the time to regulate and be able to tackle that at a better
And I didn't
time.
know that. So I've spent so much of my life not understanding that those things I really liked, I actually needed. That's what you said there is so important, because it's not just this is more fun. It's that right now I need to do this. And if you don't let me do this, my bucket is going to overflow because this is how I empty it. And if you let me do this thing, I can calm down and then I will be able to tackle that. But if you just tell me I can't do that, you're just going to be keep chucking things in this bucket and it's just flying out left, right, and center. Nothing will get done properly that way anyway. And now medication has really helped, I have to say, in terms of doing things around the house, those sorts of basic tasks, because they regulate the attention, so they stop the hyperfocus. And like I said, I can get up and do breakfast and things, but they're not a cure-all. It's not that easy, but it does help. It does make me think to myself, oh, okay, so this is what it's like to just need to put the washing on and go and put the washing on. Whoa, I remember that feeling the first time that happened when I'd been taking the medication and just thought, oh, I need to do this and this and the washing and that. And I just went and put the washing on, and then I just did it. That was quite liberating, actually. It doesn't always work like that, but it does give you an insight to how easy it is for neurotypical people.
True. I think it gives the brain time to just process individual steps. And like where I struggle with work and meeting those like 9 to 5 work day, because there'll be a lot of time in that day where I kind of aren't doing anything I'm meant to be doing work-wise. And I'll make up for it though, like potentially at 10 o'clock at night, but then I'll do the silly thing and I'll email the people I work with at that time, and then I'll get a don't work out of hours. And I'm like, well, I am, but I'm not. It's
You're making up for it. This is why, once I started my PhD, I really suited that difference when I could choose when I worked. And writing, again, lets me choose when I work, because attention, it doesn't go in the way it does for other people. And if we want to focus very hard on our work, we will get 10 times the amount done to be able to just latch on and do it then. People often wonder when I do anything. They're like, we didn't really notice you writing anything. Whenever I got to the end of, my degree, and they're like, I never saw you do any work. Did you actually do that? I'm like, yeah, well, you weren't looking, which is probably why I could do it, because you were gone and I had the space to myself. And I got 10 times more done than you would have done in 5 days of being very regular about it. So yeah, it's hard, but still, we're very worth our time. We're worth our weight in gold, let's be honest.
Definitely. See, I couldn't handle uni because I couldn't handle the deadlines and the processing,
Yeah.
what was required within the deadlines. It didn't mean I couldn't do it. And I went through 2 years, and over the 2 years, I had some tutors that were really supportive, gave me extensions, and I was like acing my grades. But then the ones that didn't give that leeway or didn't clarify things, like I was barely
Yeah.
passing. And,
There's a lot to
university,
be done in supporting
yeah.
people at university. I had my motivation was that I had a drive to get my assignments in around the M25 in London, and the traffic was so bad that it could take 30 minutes to get to uni, or it could take 2 hours if there was an accident, and you had a 0 grade if it was a minute late. And so I handed everything in a day early, and I was so scared of getting nothing. And that's when I learned to meet deadlines, and it wasn't really until then. Yeah.
Sorry, are you okay? I know it's 11. We haven't
I'm
gotten
okay.
through
We've
everything.
got
Cool.
stuff.
Yeah. Now, I asked you this question at the Oz Authors Lodge, and it's something that I'll just ask you every time I can, because I think it's really important. It's a really important discussion, and I'll share the link to the Oz Authors video on wherever I post this for work. I still wrapping my head around how that looks, but hey, we didn't have authentic representation of neurodiversity growing up in the media or literature or anything, and that's like including autism, ADHD, sensory processing, and everything else. The hashtag own voices, I still kind of haven't worked out what, I have an idea, but I haven't actually been able to translate Oz own voices into a sentence in the book world. But can you explain that, and also why it's so important that your experiences and other neurodivergent experiences, and I'm thinking of Kay Kerr's Please Don't Hug Me and other things, are represented across literature?
Yeah, I think, and I've spent a lot of time trying to process this and how to answer these questions, because there's sort of 2 parts to it. And one part is from the publishing world's point of view, the Own Voices movement, which means that you're writing from the same position as your main character in some way, whether it's as a person of colour or a disabled person or an autistic person, all the different things it can be. And that showed the publishers that there is an audience for these books. So it added value to our work. And previously, there wasn't much of that seen. You're much more likely to read these characters written by middle-class white men, let's be perfectly honest, who would be writing everyone else's point of view. And so by having the hashtag, and then that translating to an audience, a guaranteed set of readers that want that and value that, publishers then went, oh, okay, so now this is something we can look into. You've now got a niche. So that there was basically, they're more likely to get their money back for investing in you. So, and that's the sort of, that's the more practical side of it. And yet that's everything, because without them, we don't get these stories published enough to reach. And yes, there are other ways to get stories out there, but they don't have the same reach. You're not likely to get on the curriculum in a school with a self-published book, all those sorts of things. But there's also, on the other side of it, as a writer, there's a community of people supporting you. Like I have Kay behind me, and I'm obviously supporting her, and so we can help each other through the process of being published with an own voices book, which is difficult in some ways. And yeah, I don't know any other way, so I don't really know, if there's another way I could have done this. And to have that support is really amazing. And I think it's not to devalue other texts. And there are a lot of people who don't identify openly with whatever it is. Now, of course, you could be a person of colour who may not appear as such. And so then that's a different. So Carly Findlay, who wrote for Growing Up African in Australia, had to sort of go through a process of explaining to people that she is a person of colour. She is of African descent because she doesn't look the way that people expect her to look. Just as I've had to explain to people, yes, I do fit these diagnoses, even though I probably to a lot of people appear typical in some ways, maybe less so as I've started to drop the masking. It's a little bit, I don't know, which is good. That's a really good thing. So I think there's the two sides. There's the community behind in terms of the readers, and I didn't know what would happen there, but it's amazing to have people message and say that they identify and that they know that I do, so they're safe to say that to me. If I'd written this and it wasn't Own Voices, they may have identified and yet not felt as safe telling me about that, or knowing that I actually understood. I didn't just sort of clinically go about writing this. I don't know how that would have even worked. So yeah, it's a layered thing and it's important, and I'm glad that it came around perfectly timed for me and Peta Lyre to be joining in when it's definitely easier in this regard than it would have been 10 years ago.
Yeah. Speaking of masking and the world at the moment with the virus and the isolating and not being able to go out as much or at all, depending, are you finding you're not masking as much as you would if you were doing interviews in public settings, like at a book launch, or like actually like going somewhere and like if you were doing a radio station interview kind of thing, like the whole being at home in a comfortable environment?
Yes, I think you are definitely right there. And I have a lot more energy for it because everything else is normal. Good normal, routine. Everything else is routine. And then I have something that's not, and that'll be a big stir up and the house gets stirred up, which is difficult because I've got to kick everyone out and all that kind of thing. But then everything goes back to normal again. And so I can reset. And it's become a new normal. Now we're used to mum doing something at this time of day. And in fact, yesterday I had nothing on at this time of day and the kids just chose to leave. So, because it was their routine. So then they were like, we still want to go and play in the Lego room. And yes, we have a whole room. I will pretend it's for the children. So they go and have their time there. So we had to create a new normal at home. And I've had less trouble with panic. I've had less trouble with all sorts of things. And it's dawning on me how exhausting it is to go out. This is a problem a little bit because I'm aware that I can't self-isolate for the rest of my life. I don't think it would be good for me as a person. People are going to be less willing to do this sort of thing. And it worries me. This is something that gives me a bit of the anxiety peaks a little bit, that people might be less likely to have digital and online events as the world gets back into real world ones. And so then I'll be left without that contact again, unless I go out and join in, which I will need to do. But I don't mind going out to book events. They're exhausting in one way, but the masking involved to go to school and do that, or to go for a haircut, or all those sorts of things, that is exhausting. That's the most taxing because it's the most heteronormative space you can go into. It's the most, so it regulates you the most, for me, the most severely. And so those I find the biggest problem. I don't know if I answered your question.
Somewhat. I know for me, locking myself up was easy in the sense of like, oh, the world's shutting down. Okay, fine. And I think that honeymoon in some ways is over a bit because I live alone in a town where I don't know anyone face to face and I can't do my routines of getting the train an hour and a half each way to work. Not that that's a healthy thing anyway. And by the time this is over, I probably won't have to do that, which is going to be good. But it's going to take longer to adapt back than what it was to where we are now. And I think that's where I'm kind of worried is that not only getting back into that routine of being out and about and navigating all the sensory and yucky things, but people are probably more likely to be behaving differently. And yeah, like that's, I think.
Yeah, it's going to be hard. And I think recognizing that, and if your children are going back to school, my younger two go back next week, and this whole week will be the build-up week to that event and the worry about the change, and recognizing that that's going to cause all sorts of other so it will come out in weird ways. I'm much better now at picking up the fact that they will only this thing and not something else, or that they need to fixate on whatever it might be, is a reaction to the fact that they know this is coming next week and they don't know what to do with that. And respecting that is a good thing to do, let alone my own anxiety about them going back, because I want them to be gone so I can have my house back during the day and do my work without always having to be, doing everything else. And yet I have to do this like socks and lunch boxes, and I'll be worried about them the whole day because I don't want them to be worried. There's layers of worry here, but then it will calm down.
At some point you'll hit this hole. Oh wait, where are they?
I do that. I used to say this. Yeah. It's like you forgot your wallet. So whenever you're not with your children and you go out for the first time, it's a bit like going, oh no, I forgot my wallet. It's like, oh, where are they? I'll be talking to the dogs more and the guinea pigs, because that's what I do all day, because I have to talk outward. I tend to talk a lot. I process outwards. So my guinea pigs are very good at listening. So are the dogs. So yeah, luckily I have the pets there for that.
Yeah, my cat's good at listening too. Yeah. So now I've noticed you've had a lot of feedback from all different kind of people about the book. And was it what you were expecting? Like, and I guess you know it's a young adult book, but there's a lot of adult, really great feedback.
Yeah, I didn't expect all of that. I don't really know what I expected. I thought it would be a little bit more polite, like just supportive and let's be polite. But people have really read it and really let Peter into their hearts, and that's the thing that means the most, whether they identify or not. And they've really opened up to just kind of taken that ride with her, and that has meant a lot. And in terms of negative feedback, the only thing that was really that made me angry was this perception that her being gifted was an easy thing, and oh, it's nice for her. Why didn't she talk about autistic kids that aren't gifted? Like, well, for one thing, she's 16 and she's very unlikely to think to herself, gee, I'm so lucky I'm gifted. They don't do that. But also, statistics don't show that this is easy or an out. And if I had not had her as gifted, someone would have then criticized this other thing. Like you're not going to win on that, but don't should people about what their characters do, or whether or not you've managed to represent every single thing in the whole world in one novel. That's too much to put on something, because then we're writing to this purpose, and that would ruin the books. You shouldn't be you're not supposed to be ticking boxes. It's not what we're doing. We're not just going, oh, and I really need to make sure I've done this and this and this, because that's just not genuine and authentic in its writing. So that's probably the one thing that made me a little bit angry, because it was a bit like, I don't know any 16-year-olds there's no one criticizes the 16-year-old middle-class white boy who didn't sit and ponder to themselves at any point, gee, aren't they lucky that they're not anything else? No one ever says that, to Trent Dalton, or I shouldn't say that, cut that out. No one ever says that to someone else, that, why didn't they have this and this in their book? They just did that to me. But that's okay. I'm so fine with it. So fine.
It's
very
also,
calm.
Wouldn't be own voices either.
Well,
I guess.
at the end of the day, no one is. I know the IQ system's really fraught, so I don't talk about it a lot. But it's that gifted is a set of needs, is more to the point, and also can mask a diagnosis as neurodivergent, and it may also be giftedness rather than neurodivergence. So there's two sides to that are an important discussion to have. So her being gifted was the way it was going to be. I kind of fit into that bracket. It certainly didn't help me greatly for a very long time, because it's not academically excelling. That's a different thing. The straight A students, that's a different thing. And I was very clear to say Peter failed a lot. I did. I barely made it out of high school, grades wise, and I had an extremely mediocre result in terms of an OP. I still scraped my way into uni, and yeah, I ended up with a PhD, but gee, there was no given on that one. And so high school, that was rough. I needed her to be a realistic representation of what can happen in that way. Now I'm rambling at you. Sorry, Jade.
Well, it's interesting, and I think the way you describe it all is so kind of, I can relate to it, and I'm sure people listening can. And if they can't, again, it's like, well,
there are lots of ways of being neurodivergent, and but if you have not even an inkling, then you should just be listening and learning.
And you can have the highest IQ in the world, but you can struggle with, again, like, that whole fitting into the box, the over-processing of things, overthinking, over-analyzing what needs to be done, that whole task initiation and completion thing, because your mind something completely different, like my Lego that's downstairs. Yeah. Now, where to next? And I guess as well, because we haven't looked at how did you, you've got your PhD in
literature, yeah, in young adult fiction, yeah.
Well, how did you, I guess just briefly, the kind of, you clearly just didn't go straight from not writing to Peter,
Almost did. So I didn't write. So I wrote a lot of diaries when I was young. Not a lot of poetry, and it was all this sort of stuff. And that'll come out next year more in Growing Up Disabled in Australia, to have an essay in. So a lot of that and actual diary content is in my essay. So there's all of that to come. But then I wrote because I saw it as a puzzle that I didn't understand. Even though I'd studied literature for 20 years, I'd never tried to write a novel. And I tried to help someone edit a novel that they'd written. And I couldn't understand what was wrong with certain bits. And so I had to look into it. And then I'm like, you mean this happens and that should happen. And poor thing, I in the end abandoned that. I'm a terrible editor because I'm not nice and I'm not very good at understanding what they needed. Oh, it was terrible, shocking. It was a very bad idea. So then I tried writing with my kids because they had to write for school. So I helped them and we wrote a story together. And then we wrote a novel together. And I wrote a middle grade fantasy novel because they had certain needs that they couldn't find in the books that they were reading. They didn't want certain things to happen. So they wanted this level of complexity of language, but they didn't want it to be super frightening. So we rewrote that, which I thought I'd pitch, but I didn't because it was a little bit terrible, objectively. And then wrote eventually, long story short, I wrote Peta Lyre, and I think it rests on a very strange life for it to have come out quickly in the way that it did. And the next books that I've got up for consideration, there's a companion novel for Peta Lyre with 2 other characters and following what they go through, and they're both disabled in different ways, as well as being neurodivergent and varieties of queerness, just all kind of thrown in there. So it's a little bit more about their physical disabilities. And then the other one I had was completely different, and it's about panic attacks with, and again, neurodivergent protagonist, and about gold. So a little bit of gold fever and panic, and living in Brisbane City on your own. Oh, it's fascinating. I could bore you forever, but I don't know if anyone would ever choose to publish that one, but I really like it. It might be like a book for down the track because it's a little bit quirky, but I'll just keep going. I'll just keep writing until it's like you just throw darts and then one will hit the board when they decide that's the right one to come out. Yeah, that's the plan.
Do you think Peter's world or Peter's story is closing from her side?
Because Peter's written in a very certain way, it's not something you can do again. I don't know if I can't say too much without giving away the progressions that she makes during the novel. And so I liked the idea of her appearing in a companion novel so people can see what's happened with her, but without actually attempting, because if I do write her into another book, and this is the hardest bit about writing, I have to make things go wrong again. So in my head, she has this happy ending, and someone wrote to me yesterday saying that they've imagined she's gone and she's become a medic, and she's gone down to the slopes and she travels around the world as a medic for the ski slopes. And I just thought, that's lovely. I want that happy ending, and I want that comfortable ending for her. And if I wrote her again into a novel, I'd have to make it all go wrong again. And I kind of feel like I've done enough. Poor Peter. So at the moment, she sits as she does. But there are a lot of other interesting people in her world.
I recommend go buying it and reading and getting into Peter's world and understanding, particularly if you aren't autistic or neurodivergent, understanding a bit more what it's like to be neurodivergent, navigating TAFE and that kind of teenage years and all the different things that happen and all the different things we have to do to navigate the world and kind of hit some kind of level of feeling accepted or feeling like we're normal. I mean, no one's normal.
We belong. We want to belong. That's what we need.
We want to belong. We want to be accepted and just treated like everyone else, really, and not judged for quirky.
Yeah, and or even better, loved for it.
It's been lovely chatting to you today.
And you. Thank you for having me, Jay. And for all your support. So much support. I can't imagine this journey without you at all.
So to give my listeners a little bit of info there, back at the beginning of the year when the fires happened, the Fires for Authors, you played a big part in that. There was a big fundraiser.
Yes. Yeah. Authors for Fireys. We had a whole thing on Twitter, which then progressed onto other social media, where all the authors auctioned items, and the money went to the rural fire brigades around Australia, and it took off, and we raised $500,000, I think. And Jay bid on my book and outbid so many people. It was amazing. I was absolutely, I felt honoured that you would put that attention on Peter. Thank you.
It felt really risky. It was kind of, I like that I'm so competitive with those kinds of things. I remember there was one like a few years ago, there was some like my favourite band had they'd drawn on these Converse shoes. And it was like one of those big fundraising things, charity fundraising things where all these different musicians had created their own designs on Converse shoes. And I ended up being outbid and I was so annoyed. But then I got contacted a week later, and the person that outbid me actually lived in the same town that I did, which was hilarious because it was a worldwide thing, and they hadn't paid for it. So I got offered, like they
That's
offered it
so
free,
good.
which
That's
was great. But then there's that risk of like, am I going to like it? Like, you know, and I think,
Can you imagine my risk? What if you didn't like it?
well, I guess this is where it can be hard reading books, reading like content created by neurodivergent or autistic people, and being afraid of what it's gonna.
Yeah, it's bracing yourself. Jess always talks about it, that we brace ourselves for things to be wrong. It's hard. It is confronting. Yeah, I get that.
But I think it was the best decision I've made this year.
Yes.
It was such a good read, and I really hope others enjoy it too.
Thank you so much, Jay.
So yeah, thanks. I hope we can do this again sometime soon because you're so interesting to talk to.
Anytime. Anytime.